Christina Herrick, produce editor for The Packer and host of Tip of the Iceberg. I'm here with another episode, and joining me is my first three-time guest, Chris Pawelski, a fourth-generation farmer. Chris, you've been on. You're a friend of the podcast. Thanks for joining me again.
It's my pleasure and my privilege. And as I've told you, you're one of my favorite interviewers. I've done this hundreds upon hundreds of times over the last 30 years, and you're one of my favorites. So thank you for. I'm honored. And the Packer's a great publication, and Farm Journal, and they've done great coverage of our issues over the years, and I greatly appreciate it.
And I love that you just have all that on record. So there you have it, audience.
It's true.
So the reason I brought you on, we've talked on and offline just about different topics that you can weigh in on, and succession planning and farm transitions is one that we've kind of kicked around for a while. So that's kind of why you're here, is to talk about that. And I know when we talked about Muckville and we talked about even advocacy, you kind of have alluded to some of the challenges that you and your family have faced.
Yep.
So kind of talk about, some of that. Get us started. So, century-long family farm, and then now the farm has transitioned. So set us up for that. Tell us how we got to the point where we're talking now and kind of where you were.
Well, I greatly appreciate the fact that you've brought me on to talk about this. It's really an important topic that a lot of, people don't like to think about it. People don't like to think about the fact that, we grow old and we die, and things move on, and you have to plan for that. And it's something you don't want to think about, because sometimes you carry the illusion if you don't think about it, it won't happen. Yeah. But it is going to happen. So in our case, we started working on this, or doing this, actually back in the early aughts, around 2004, I believe it was. And we're very fortunate in New York State, New York FarmNet, which is we talked about before, which has done a lot of different programs that we've availed ourselves with. The first time we actually interacted with them through the cooperative extension system, Cornell Cooperative Extension, was they had a program to help or assist with farm transfer issues and farm protection. It's not just transfer, but it's also protecting your assets. And the person who pushed for it actually was my wife, who did not grow up in the area, did not grow up on a farm. But she recognized that this needed to be done in order to, first and foremost, to protect the assets that we owned. And we'd known people in the area who did not do that, and basically they lost much of what they possessed to the government in terms of getting long-term care and the like. So my wife pushed for it. FarmNet offered, at the time, they had like a series of, I believe they had like seminars or meetings, and then Cornell set up us to meet with representatives of them, and also the legal firm that they used, which was based out of Syracuse, to work on the transfers. And so we did that. We worked with the legal firm, Scalero, Vetter, I can't think of the entire name, but they're a firm that specializes this in Syracuse, in farm transfers. And basically what they did was they worked on setting up our farm and our assets and put it in a trust. And that trust is designed first, to protect your assets in case something happens, but mainly for later on, in case of, say, one of your parents develops some kind of debilitating disease of some sort. The trust protects your assets from the state seizing it all, and especially in terms of if you apply for and get in Medicaid. Yeah. And so that was the primary impetus. And then, of course, the other part is, the older generation has to get used to the fact that the next generation is going to be doing the operations and making the decisions. And though when the trust was set up, I was made a trustee. The trust, that didn't change. And this is something that a lot of people kind of have reluctance to, and even outside of farming, I've heard. It didn't change who controlled things or who directed things. In other words, because I was a trustee didn't mean all of a sudden I made all the decisions for everything. The decisions were still being made by my father. My father was the captain, and that nothing changed there. And you could set legal protections in there to ensure that. But bottom line is my father still was the person who made the primary decisions in what we did in the operation.
Okay, so talk a little bit about kind of breaching that subject and then some of the emotion, because as you said,
Yeah.
yes, your father was still making the decisions, but I would assume, not to use the word trust when we're talking about a trust, but I would assume there had to be some communication and just discussion involved so that it didn't seem like you were taking the reins out of his hands. Because, and I think when I've written about farm transitions, it's always a difficult subject just because of the human nature of farming. Yes, you're the operations, but the people involved, it's a multi-generation farm. They've, put their life into it. So having that discussion about next generation, next steps is always tough. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? And like you said, kind of how you worked with your family to reassure who was still making decisions, who had, where the power dynamics were.
Yeah, that's a vital part of it. And we really emphasize, my wife and I and my brother and such, that that my dad and my mom still were they're the owners. They're the primary people that granted we own some stuff too, but they were the ones that were in the driver's seat, and that wasn't going to change. Now, what helped in our situation was there were examples in the area of people, like I said, who lost their homes and such when they were on Medicaid and put into a facility, and the state took it as part of the rules of Medicaid, their assets. So my parents saw that, and that was, it was, I feel terrible for the people that it happened to, but because they saw that, they saw what could happen, and they recognized that, and they had good forethought,
Wow.
and they accepted it. And my parents were humble too, which was good. But again, my dad was in the driver's seat, and that never, until the day he died, that didn't change. Even during his sickness, when he was diagnosed with cancer and such, through that 6 months, he still made the decisions. Nothing was taken away from him as far as that, and we really, really assured him. And again, when the trust is structured and such, there could be legal mechanisms put in it to ensure that as well. In other words, that the trustees, whatever, can't run rampant and do whatever they want and sell everything or whatever. There's protections, legal protections, that can ensure that things are maintained as the owner, or the primary beneficiary, or whatever, or in my case, the parents, see fit. And we assured my dad that was, and my mom, that was the case. And we were fortunate. They didn't have a problem with it. They didn't put up really any resistance. They thought it was a good idea, actually.
So then talk about kind of what happened to the farm after that, because obviously we've talked, anyone who's listened to our conversations in the past or read about you know that you're no longer farming onions like you were at one point, and part of that's in the Muckville documentary. But talk about that change and how that impacted the trust as well.
Yeah, that was a big adjustment, and that happened post. My father was diagnosed with cancer in late August, early September of 2016, and unfortunately, he was diagnosed with stage 4 renal cancer, and he passed 6 months later. And it then was up my brother and I, and we still continued to farm onions for a couple of more seasons, 2017 and 2018, and then we kind of separated and went separately. He continued to do some onions, and he went to hemp, and I switched after 29 in 2020. I switched to doing the mixed greens and doing on a smaller scale, and it just made more economic sense for my wife and I, as far as that. But having the trust, we were still able to maintain the assets. Now it had to change as far as how some things were used, and we now rent much of the facility out. Some of the farm, the barns, I still use, but some we rent out to a neighbor who's using it, and he uses much of the ground, and we swap and change. But for the most part, he's renting it out. It was tough. I mean, as Muckville talks about, it was extremely hard. I mean, I started working on the farm when I was 5 years old. I mean, I still have clear memories. Matter of fact, the primary field I use now, for growing much of my greens was always the first after my grandmother had a little small lot in the yard, but then after that, it was always the first field we harvested. And
Mm.
my dad used to have a homegrown variety. It was referred to as a flat. It was kind of a flat onion, and the flats were always put there. And you're talking, I mean, literally 50 years ago, and
Yeah.
I still have vivid memories of following behind the harvester, picking up the onions as they fell out of the crate, and doing that work. And it's just a fabric of who I am. And so that was hard,
Yeah.
but having the trust maintains that the asset, things are protected. Now there's work involved as far as maintaining that. Prior to my father passing and my mother's condition worsening, they took care of a lot of the certain aspects of the farm as far as like the overarching bills and such, like the insurances and things like that. And those are things that I had to learn about and take over and restructure. But again, the things are still there for my use. I still use much of the equipment. It's just that now it's changed. It's changed a great deal, and it's like I said, it's hard. But I think my father would be happy with the direction things are going in. I mean, we're still a viable operating
Yeah.
farm. It's just that it's a different type of farm now. But we're still growing stuff. I was out before this interview. I was out. We've had 3¼ inches of rain. I was digging trenches of clearing, trying to get some water out. Literally, nearly fell in the mud. You would have had me all. I would have been an awful mess. But we planted, my wife and I, on Friday. We planted about 415 plants, tomato, pepper, and eggplants we transplanted. And we hope to do some seed planting by this weekend, and if it doesn't rain. And so it's still operating. But again, everything is protected. And a big part of that, which I hope we talk about later, is, what happened to my mother. And that was a big part of, and where the trust really came in as far as being something extremely important, and that transfer being extremely important.
Well, we can talk about that now because I have some questions I want to ask you about kind of next generation and future farming. But I feel like you kind of set us up for that. So let's talk about where that trust came into play with your mom.
Yeah, this is huge. My mom was diagnosed with dementia
Yeah.
before my father passed, a couple of years before, and it was mild. She was still doing the farm books, the payroll, and all that sort of thing. And then when my father was diagnosed, it kind of accelerated with her. And then I'm actually, when my dad, with a month of his illness, I went into the house. I saw there was a bill from Farm Family for the insurance. It was like, past due, about to lose your insurance. So then I realized, my wife and I have to step in. And my mom's, her dementia progressed. And it got to eventually a point where my mother could no longer care for herself. She had falls. She broke her wrist, she broke her hip, she broke her collarbone, and she was not able to care for herself on her own. So the trust enabled us to do primary thing necessary for her care, long-term care, and her benefit was applying for Medicaid. And once you get on Medicaid, depending on the state you live in, but for most states, it opens up a whole new world as far as long-term care. And in particular, for my mom, there's a federal program. It's called the Nursing Home Transition Diversion Program, or the NHTD program, and it's colloquially referred to as the waiver program. And it provides 24/7 home care for someone.
Wow.
So my mom has an aide. An aide comes in. It's always an aide with her, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They rotate, obviously. And they do light cleaning, they cook for her, they bathe her, they clean her, they do all sorts of things for her as far as her care. They don't grocery shop, and obviously they don't take care of the bills and that sort of thing. But that enables my mother. The whole point of that program, by the way, is the federal government realizes it's cheaper and more beneficial
Yeah.
to the person than to be at home than to be in a facility.
Yeah.
It's always much better. So the whole point of it is to get people out of a facility, get them back in a house, or keep
Yeah.
them in the house or facility. So my mom is in her home, and maintained being in there since my father's passing, and she has good quality of life. The dementia is stabilized. It's at a certain, it's at a point she knows who she is, she knows who I am and my wife is and such, but ask what she had for breakfast, she couldn't tell you. But her demeanor is very good, and she's happy. That's what's important. And everything is designed that we're doing is for her care and her benefit, and to make sure that she's as comfortable and as happy that she can be. And being at home is an important part. So my little thing I'm going to say is, this should be something that should be available under Medicare, and it should be available because the restrictions are, when you do it, there are a lot of hoops as far as the economic restrictions. You have to be poverty level, so you have to get rid of a lot of your assets. You have to get rid of, there's a 5-year look back. This is something, by the way, you really want to plan. Those watching this, you want to start working on this now, because under the federal rules, as far as getting a Medicaid application, there's a 5-year look back. So it's 5 years. So you have to have 5 years in advance before you can benefit fully from it. So, and then there's another aspect. She gets so much money with Social Security and such, and she has a spend down, or only a part of it she can keep, and the rest goes back to the government. But there's a program many states have, and New York is one of them. They have what's called income pool trust. So instead of that money going back to the government, that money goes to this income pool trust. They take 10% of it, of that payment each month, but the rest of it can be used for her bills. So any bill that she has, which she has significant bills still to maintain the property and the like, goes towards that. So she doesn't lose all that money under that program. And again, many states have that, and it's called income pool trust, and New York State is one of them. And these are things, this is stuff that should be taught, in my opinion. High schools should be teaching this, and actually this should be part of a class, life skills, how to do a bank account, what's involved in investing, and what's in terms of what's involved in terms of succession planning, elder care down the line, because there's no guidebook on this. So I had to learn all this stuff on the fly, like what was an income pool trust, what is the NHTD program, what is how do you get into Medicaid, and then how do you avail yourself of programs like SNAP and HEAP, which are part of it as well. There is no, it's not no one comes up and explains it to you. Fortunately, like FarmNet helped out a great deal. That law firm did, and a lot of it you have to, it's kind of trial and error. You have to learn on your own, unfortunately. So I'm always happy to, people have questions, I'm always happy to answer them and help. I like to help people. So if someone out there has questions and later on and they want to reach out, I am certainly very happy to help them, point them in the right direction.
Yeah, when I think, as you were explaining that, I'm also thinking your family, though, had the foresight to move ahead with the trust way before you really needed it in place. And thank goodness they did, because as you said, that kind of takes away that risk. When your mother needed care, it was no longer in her name. Or when your dad got sick, same thing. Because I think, unfortunately, sometimes that happens with farms, where it's once you hit that point of immediate need that then the transition becomes a conversation, and that's really the challenge. Is you got to have that conversation, or be open to that conversation early. And no one likes to talk about that. No one, yes, our fate is inevitable, but no one really likes to talk about that, because especially with someone like farm families, where you put 50 plus years on a family farm, then to have to acknowledge that you're not going to have that in your name moving forward, and that's all you've known for that long, it is really tough. And I think that's the human nature part of it that I think we've talked about.
Absolutely. And we were we were lucky, because we planned 13 years in advance until we actually really needed it, and thank God we did. And again, it was my wife that pushed for it. I didn't even thought about it, and it was she who, not from a farming background, she just looked at it from economics and seeing experiences of other people in the area.
Wow.
She said, we have to work on this. And she was absolutely correct. And it's something you have to do. You're exactly right. You have to, it's difficult, but it's a conversation you have to have now. And you have to
Yeah.
start working on now, today. Um, Sooner the better. There's no, again, the protections and such associated with it. I mean, it costs some money. It costs to pay a lawyer to set it up and such, but it's money well spent. And it's very much worth it.
So let's talk next generation. I know you've kind of talked about the role of your kids, um, whether they're going to be on the farm or not. But I'm thinking more broadly. I mean, obviously, you work on farm advocacy. You really talk about the challenges facing farmers. So let's talk about that next generation. Knowing what and I think you've already given some advice, but what are your hopes for that next generation of farmers in terms of succession planning and taking over farms and kind of continuing to keep farming land in farming?
That's a good question, and I'll tell you, always when I think of that, I'm always reminded of years ago when I testified before the United States Senate back in 2010, and it was the first hearing held in the Senate on the reauthorization of the Farm Bill at that time, and there was three panels. The first panel was Secretary at the time under the Obama administration. Secretary was
Vilsack.
Vilsack. He was the secretary, and then it was the heads of the two farming organizations, Bob Stallman and Roger Young, I think it was from National Farmers Union, and then there was four farmers that were chosen, and I was Senator Gillibrand's designee to be the one to testify. During the hearing, Vilsack talked about the idea of he wanted to create 100,000 new farmers, like when Clinton created 100,000 new cops. And my wife and I were sitting behind him during it, and we actually audibly laughed out loud. It probably wasn't right. I don't know if you noticed or not, but we kind of laughed a little bit, and we were whispering, we were texting each other, like, that's really not well thought out. And so during the hearing, there's either Senator Chambliss or the chair at the time was from Arkansas, Blanche Lincoln, asked us what we thought about that proposal. And my comment was, and I was very tactful because I was hoping actually for him to visit my farm because he was from Iowa and I went to school in Iowa and stuff. So I was hoping for that. But
Yeah.
I said, instead of like any kind of having a scheme trying to create 100,000 new farmers, why not make farming more profitable for those that are in it, and then you'll naturally create more farmers because the children, the offspring of the farmers will go into it. And then I was able to employ a Bugs Bunny quote where I said, when I say profitable, I don't want to, I don't want to be Elmer J. Fudd millionaire and own a mansion and a yacht. I just want to make a living. So I got a Bugs Bunny quote in. That's my degree is in broadcasting and film studies, so I was very happy about that. But the point is, again, the idea of creating farmers, it's and new farmers, it's extremely difficult. Farming is a very expensive
Yes.
endeavor. The land is expensive. The equipment is expensive. There's a lot of different expertise you have to be aware of. You have to know how to inputs, and you have to know how to sell and who to sell to. And these things, I don't even know some of this stuff, and I've been doing it for 50 years. So it's like, it's a big learning curve. So this is what we need to do. We need to have policies, and the federal government in particular needs to work on more policies to make it more profitable. My oldest son, Caleb, he loved doing farm work. I made him, he had not as young as I started, but he still, as a young child, he was in his preteens, started, and then he would work in the summers, helping us out. And he enjoyed it. My youngest son, not as much, but my oldest, he liked it. He enjoyed operating equipment, and he enjoyed the work and such like that. But he saw how we lived.
Yeah.
And my wife and I were, many times just hanging on by our fingernails, and, we were living year to year and in a lot of debt. And he did not want that. He wanted to be able to make a decent living, which he does as a civil engineer now, as he works in the city of Chicago. I still have dreams of him coming back. I mean, I left for a period of 3 years and did another job and came back. So, maybe a period of time may come where he may say, hey, I'd like to come back to it, or, even work part-time at some kind of job and then work else on the farm. And some people have done that. But we need as in policy, if we had been things have been in place where it made it more profitable and such, even like the years we had disasters, if we had better compensation for what
Yeah.
we lost, it would be a different story. So I can't blame them. I mean, I don't, I totally understand, but I think that's a main reason why the next generation is not going into it. Why would you go into something where you see how hard your family works and how much risk they take and sometimes what losses they have and such, and then have nothing to show for it at the end. It's totally understandable why they would want to go into it. That's where it's on the part of the federal government in particular. We have to start designing policies and such that better compensate us so that we, and again, like I said in the documentary Muckville, there's plenty of money to go around.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not going around. It's going to certain places, and in many cases, it's not going to the farmer,
Yeah.
and that's the problem. And that's why during the hearing also, I think Bill Sackett, they were talking about urban farming and rooftop farming and community gardens like that, and that and CSA, that stuff's great. I have no issues. I think we should encourage that, and we should encourage beginning farmers and the like, economically and through programs
Yeah.
like that. I think that's great stuff. But that being said, that's the way I put it was that's like shuffling the. And I think I said this during the hearing. That's like shuffling the deck chairs as the Titanic is sinking. I mean, we have to address the deep systemic
Yeah.
problems as far as why farmers aren't making a living, and that's the point I made in the essay I wrote in the Albany Times Union on sustainable disparities. It's just not sustainable, and it's just basically what's happening is not fair, and we have to adjust that, or we're going to lose our small farmers, and we're going to lose a lot of our farmers, and we're going to be down to a handful of corporations that control it.
Yeah, well, we're nearing almost the end, but I kind of wanted to wrap it up by, again, kind of seeing if you had any advice for those tuning in. I know one action item you already said is, if you're in a position to have a transition in a family farm, you already said, you need to start working on that now before you need it. But what other advice would you have for those tuning in that might be nearing that, or how you kind of start the conversation? What are your thoughts?
I mean, the first and foremost, I would, if you've seen this, I would play this for your family. I would definitely play this episode of this interview for your family to watch, especially of any kind of reluctance. And I can tell you as someone, and I'm telling you very sincerely, if we hadn't done what we done, and my mother, slipped her dementia, slipped and such, we would have to put her in a facility, and we would have to have surrendered everything that we owned. All our barns, our homes, everything would have been gone. And do you want that? Do you want everything to go because of basically pride? That's number one. Number two, I would imagine most FarmNet. Again, I've said this over and over again. FarmNet should really be something that's in every state should have a FarmNet. Every cooperative extension system should have it. And some I think do have comparable things. And AgriSafe's another very good organization, in particular. But the extension systems do have programs like this. All of them do associated with this. So I would reach out to your cooperative extension agent that handles your crop or your area, or the ag program leader, and talk to them about what they have available as far as assisting with this. And most of them do have those programs. Reach out to them, and they're the ones that could really link you up. And then I really strongly advise to move forward on it, to have discussions, to talk to the law firm. Typically, the first consultation is free. Reach out to them, find out what it would cost, what is involved as far as setting it up, and then I can't stress enough to move forward, because things can happen. I mean, I hate to say this, but someone could have a stroke and be debilitated and need 24/7 care. What do you do? And how do you care for them? And so you don't want to be in that position where you're completely unprepared economically, or how your operation is set up. You want to be ahead of the curve there. So I mean, I would definitely, if you have family members that maybe are reluctant, see if they'll watch this. And, and again, anybody has any questions, I am very happy to, my email is evep@warwick.net. It's my wife's first name, Eve, E-V-E, the last initial of my name, P, at warwick.net, wararwick.net. Reach out to me. I am very happy to talk to anyone about this, but definitely reach out to your extension system and ask them about how do we go about beginning the process to do a farm transfer and to set up a trust.
This has been such a great conversation. I know again, I bring you on. We have these difficult conversations. I feel like you need to come on the podcast sometime and it's just light. We need to have a happy conversation at some point. Although I think it's important and I know it's necessary. So, I thank you again for joining me, Chris. I always enjoy having you on the podcast. And like I said, you're a 3-timer now. You're getting closer to getting the smoking jacket like SNL has. So I'll have to develop some kind of swag.
Well, I have to tell you, Christine, again, and into the Packard Farm Journal, I have to, my hat is off. I won't take it off because I don't have a lot of hair, but my hat is off to you guys for the coverage you're doing on these issues, like with Muckville with the farmer mental health, and then the advocacy work that we're doing, which, in that piece I talked about, I could teach people how to do it themselves and the like, which is like I'm trying to do and do a speaker thing. But and this is important stuff. This is important stuff for nuts and bolts for farmers to stay in operation, to continue to and to pass it along. And I want to thank you for covering this. Not everybody is, and it's vitally important, and it needs to be heard. So I from the bottom of my heart, Christina, I'm so appreciative to you guys for doing that very much.
Well, and likewise, I really enjoy having you on. I memean, and all jokes aside, our conversations are always great. You bring up great topics. You've got a lot of background, and it's always a good conversation, even though it might be a tough subject. So, Thank you again, Chris, for joining me.
Thank you.
And don't forget, if you like what you hear, you can catch new episodes of Tip of the Iceberg on your favorite podcast platform like Google, Spotify, Apple, and more. And that's a wrap for this edition of Tip of the Iceberg, brought to you by the Packer Produce Market Guide and Farm Journal. Join us again soon for more industry insights. Bye.